Live from the Left Coast Productions, this is In Deep. Not much has been predictable about the Republican presidential primary battle, including Rick Santorum's 3-state sweep last week. So who is this guy? And why is he suddenly a viable candidate? Or, as ABC News quoted somebody saying, at least less non-viable? Behind the ascendancy of Rick Santorum, this hour on In Deep. And before we move on to the topics of the day here on In Deep with me, Angie Coiro, I feel like I need a demented sidekick. I wonder where I might find one to review the topics of the day. Oh, yeah, it is our demented sidekick, Buttercup. GottaLaff. Laffy, welcome back to the show to give us your view of the important news of the week.
Yeah, well, hang on just a second. I just got to remove that aspirin from between my knees here. Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
Good old-fashioned girl, are you?
Well, yeah, back in Foster Freeze's day, his wife would hold Viagra between her knees so she wouldn't have to get anywhere near the guy.
Smart woman, would you? But, apparently contraception is the big topic du jour with the GOP today.
Oh, God, yes. And Republicans actually backed birth control mandates before they didn't. The LA Times did a report that was talking about that in 6 states, including Arkansas, those mandates were signed by GOP governors, not governments. It would be governors. And more than a third of the 22 states that had similar regulations had Republican support. And back in 2006, Mitt Romney, you know him, he signed a health care overhaul that kept the contraceptive mandate signed by his Republican predecessor in place. And George W. Bush did not challenge a similar mandate back in 2000. So,
So what's the answer? They collectively fell on their heads since then? What's the deal?
The answer is that they're showing shiny keys to all the voters. Look over here because we can't compete on the real issues. This is just a big old diversion.
Well, it's a good thing then that they had the opportunity to grill the Health and Human Services Chief Sebelius, because they could ask her all about this birth control stuff.
Except when they didn't. They actually had her at a hearing. It was a Senate hearing, and you would think that they would have just absolutely, bashed her or flooded her with questions. And in fact, Orrin Hatch opened with a question. And he asked about the revised contraception mandate and whether she had discussed it with either the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops or any other groups like Planned Parenthood. She said no. That was it. That was all they talked about.
What do you think was going on there? Did they think they just couldn't win that conversation with her, or it was too hot to handle? What?
I think it was just an excuse. This whole thing is a wedge issue, and I don't think they really care. I really don't. I think this is just something to get everybody's attention away from all their other, they can't win on the economy right now. They can't win on much of anything right now, as the polls are showing. So this is it. At
least they have those GOP debates they can rely on to pack the viewers in.
Yes, except for the CNN.
Except when they didn't.
Yes, exactly.
There's a theme here.
CNN tried to throw a debate on, I think it's March 1st, and Mitt Romney said no, and then Ron Paul said no, and then looking at that, Ricky Santorum said, well, hell, if they're not going to come, I'm not going to come. So nobody is going to show up, and so Newt Gingrich could have shown up and just talked to himself like he always does, but instead CNN decided to cancel the whole thing.
Oh, my. Oh, my. Well, we surprisingly have a little time to cover one other story that you tipped me off to earlier. And this again, goes to a Republican, the rising, shining star, Rick Santorum.
Yeah. He is railing about Mitt Romney and his attack ads, right? Mm-hmm. So what does he do? He calls everybody else elite snobs, and everybody else, by that I mean the president and his voters. He said, these elite snobs look down their nose at you, but that's not an attack at all.
Well, what's that old saying? It's okay if you're a Republican.
Exactly. I call him hypocrite of the day.
Wait, can we go back to that ad, though, when he's talking about the Romney attack ads, and there was a cardboard Rick Santorum being spattered with mud?
Some unidentified gooey brown stuff that you could probably Google. It was probably not the best choice of stuff to use.
But But, you just have to ask yourself, it's kind of like when what was the thing they did on his website where they were trying to raise money and it was Christians United and monetizing or something, and it was and now they have brown stuff being thrown at them in the ads, and you keep thinking to yourself, this can't all be unconscious.
Do they not read their own news about their own candidate, or really are they that dense? Or are they trying to get the attention, as you said, by intentionally using this stuff, which I wouldn't think is the best idea for their constituents and their voters?
Although here's another possibility we haven't talked about: the possibility that Santorum walks in the door, approves the ad copy, the pictures, whatever, closes the door when he leaves, and they all double over laughing.
Yeah, he'd be that dumb, and they'd be that hysterical. Who knows why everything they do is a big question mark in my head. As I read the news every day, as I watch the news reports, I really am scratching my head. And I just read, I wish I could tell you where it was from, but I just read a report that said that they're betting on Obama to win now in November.
Wow. You know what? And you will write about it beautifully, as you always do, on thepoliticalcarnival.net. GottaLaff, love you dearly. Thank you. And we'll see you back next week with your own individual, inimitable take on the news. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
GottaLaff brings us a look at the news every week. In just a few moments, we're going to swing into our topic du jour here on In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro. Stick around for that. It's another hour of In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro. Did you catch the typo of all places, this was on the Fox News website? The article was about presidential candidate Rick Santorum's request for Secret Service protection in the wake of a, quote, rowdy rally where he was frighteningly chanted at by occupiers, apparently. According to FoxNews.com, this is a quote, Santorum says it's a sad state of affairs that suck protection is necessary. Okay, I would contend that suck protection is a good idea wherever Santorum is involved. So engage that for this whole hour as we examine the rise of Rick Santorum, as I cannot believe I'm even saying this, as a possible actual contender for the Republican nomination. Or is he? What is Rick Santorum? Is he the closest available thing to a blank slate for right-wing voters to scrawl their protest votes on? Is he truly representative of the mentality of his supporters? Is he a flash in the pan? What does his past tell us about his potential as a competitor to Obama? In a few minutes, we're going to talk to Tim Dickinson. He covers politics for Rolling Stone. First, though, we're going to bring on someone who actually lived through life as a constituent to Rick Santorum, and conveniently enough, she focuses a lot of her independent writing and research on the right wing, and especially right-wing fundamentalists. Let's bring on independent writer and researcher Rachel Tabachnick. Rachel, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you on. Well, Santorum served a good long time in Pennsylvania as your representative. Do you recall your first impressions of him when he came on the scene?
Well, I've been in the state a long time. I moved to the state about 92. At that point in time, he had already been elected to the U.S. House in 1990, elected again in 1992, and then in 1994 became our U.S. Senator. And yes, I can recall feeling at the time that perhaps he was a bit out of step with your average Pennsylvanian. Rick Santorum has leaned sharply toward the right throughout his political career, and very quickly, as our U.S. Senator, started to pursue policies that I would say were not in line with most Pennsylvanians' views.
Researcher and writer Rachel Tabachnick actually served as a constituent to Rick Santorum. We're picking her memory about that. Do you recall whether, I find it interesting to look at this as a template because you say that he appeared from early on to you to be out of step with the average Pennsylvanian. And yes, obviously, he went on to succeed quite well there. And you can look at him now and say, well, he's largely out of step with many Americans. What do you think about how he operated back then, that despite his apparent differences with the voters, he managed to go on and take and hold office?
That's a good question. I think as the years went by, it became more apparent how right-wing Rick Santorum really was. And let me give you a few examples of things that happened along the way that national listeners might not be aware of. For instance, it was Rick Santorum who inserted language in the No Child Left Behind Act to allow something other than evolution to be taught in science classrooms. Now, this language was later removed from the bill itself and put with some of the accompanying verbiage that accompanied the bill but was not legally enforced by the bill. But it has been used ever since by both creationist and intelligent design promoters as the reason why public schools should be able to teach the controversy, is what they call it. This was Santorum's wording, and Santorum was the one who was promoting this at the national level, the idea that creationism and intelligent design could be taught in public school science classrooms. Another example of something that happened along the way, during the George W. Bush administration, Santorum has said that it was his idea to come up with the word Islamofascism and to address Muslims around the world as Islamofascist.
Oh, how proud he must be.
Yes. And he has spoken, he has given speeches in the guise of what they call academic freedom with David Horowitz's outfit during Islamofascism week at colleges. He's given speeches claiming that he at one point convinced George W. Bush to use the word Islamofascist, but then the State Department after that point talked Bush out of it. So all along the way, it became apparent that Santorum was very right-wing, but was moving further and further to the right. Then, of course, we have his positions on not only abortion, but contraception. And, of course, during this campaign, he has come out very openly objecting to contraception. And in January, in an interview, said that states should be able to outlaw contraception.
And what's really odd about that is, and this is consistent with most right-wingers, they're constantly arguing against government overregulation and government intrusion. They don't seem to see that contradiction, that telling a woman what she can do with her body, which medicine she can have access to, is not an example of government intrusion. In this and in other cases, do you think that he is strategic? Is he a true believer? Is he both?
I think it's both. I think he's always found his support in the far right, but I also think he's a true believer. And it's very curious because as Pennsylvanians are very aware of Santorum's personal history, and his personal history has involved a lot of very traumatic events for their family, including a situation years ago in which Karen Santorum was pregnant, only a few weeks away from delivery, and almost died. And in this case, which has received some press, and it probably will receive more press because of the positions that he's taking, in this case, as Karen Santorum was very ill and with what's reported to be 105-degree fever, sepsis setting in, the doctors chose to save her life, to give her this infusion of heavy-duty antibiotics, and the child was delivered and only lived for a couple of hours. What is frustrating to many Pennsylvanians is, despite the fact that the Santorums have had these very difficult life experiences, what Santorum has taken from that is not to have the kind of decisions that he and his wife had. He now is going to dictate that others would not be able to make these decisions for themselves. Because, of course, if we go where Santorum is talking about, where all abortion would be criminalized, then we can assume that doctors will take a very different view of what they can and cannot do to save a woman's life in that kind of situation.
Well, we just did a whole hour of the war on women, and I don't want to retread too much of that ground, but I think Santorum, this is a relevant part of the conversation about Santorum. There was the revelation earlier this week that in his book, It Takes a Family, there was blame laid on radical feminists for undermining families and trying to persuade women to find their joy and their fulfillment in the workplace. And his excuse was, my wife wrote that part. And I kind of wonder about the dual role he's assigning her there. He's acknowledging that she was a working partner in this book, And yet she's a convenient receptacle for the blame when something went wrong. That to me is very revealing.
Yes, and you see this all through their family history. For example, she has a background as a nurse. She has a law degree, but she's never practiced law. They have raised their children outside of the school system. In fact, this is one of the controversies that was big in Pennsylvania just prior to the 2006 election, when Santorum lost to a very large margin, about 18%, to Bob Casey, the Democratic candidate for senator. They had moved to Virginia and bought a home in Virginia, but were still claiming residency in Pennsylvania, and were using the Penn Hill School cyber charter system to educate their children. Mm-hmm. And this became a big issue in the 2006 election because they were claiming residency in Pennsylvania while living in Virginia and running up something between $60,000 and $100,000 worth of bills with the Penn Hills charter school system.
How did they justify that, or did they address that publicly?
It became a pretty big scandal in the state around 2005, before the 2006 election. And what ended up happening is the charter cyber school system was run by a big Republican donor, and they decided that in order to, I believe, to sort of tamp down this, what was becoming a scandal, that they would educate the Santorum children on their dime and not charge the school system anymore. And so the scandal sort of went away.
But it's almost an acknowledgement that they were wrong in the first place. If they had to change it, if someone else suddenly started picking up the bill quietly, that's pretty much an acknowledgement that they were in the wrong.
Yes, and what was interesting about it, when Santorum first ran for the U.S. House in 1990, he had gone after the Democratic incumbent for not living in Pennsylvania. And then, of course, they turned around and did exactly the same thing and charged this large amount of money to the Penn Hills School District, where they owned a house that they clearly were not living in. So there were all kinds of things like this that were going on in Pennsylvania, with Pennsylvanians looking at what Rick Santorum would say versus what Rick Santorum would do. And in terms of these issues with his family that were very controversial.
I didn't warn you that I would ask you to get out and polish up your crystal ball, but glancing into the future here, do you believe he really could be the candidate for the Republicans?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, up to this point, I think the reason that we've not heard a lot about the things in Santorum's background and how many Pennsylvanians feel about Santorum, is that we really didn't take it very seriously. Mm-hmm. Like I said, he lost by 18 points in the last senatorial election to Bob Casey. So we just didn't take it seriously. My take on this has been that this is part of the anybody but Romney slate of candidates. And we've seen sort of this roller coaster of various anybody but Romney candidates. But the question is, will an anybody but Romney candidate turn out as the nominee? I guess that is entirely possible now.
Well, we'll check in with you if it does. And I guess that's a new phrase now. It's anybody but Romney, asterisk, even if it's Rick Santorum.
Strange but true, perhaps.
Rachel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Rachel Tabachnick is an independent researcher, and she contributes to talk2action.org. That's talk, the numeral 2, action.org. And she's the co-founder of the blog Narwatch. And welcome back to In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro. It's good to have you sticking around here. And look at you. You've stayed through a whole segment of talking about Rick Santorum. Let's see how much longer you can keep it up, because he's our topic this hour. But we're going to go a little past that, too. Let's spend a little more time on the topic of Santorum himself. And after that, we're going to talk about the Republican Party as a whole. Someone like him does not exist without a context. He doesn't exist in a void. So what is the nature of the Republican Party? and the campaign that it's been running so far in bringing forward these various candidates. What gives birth to a Rick Santorum? We're going to get into that a little bit later. Let's dive right into conversation with my next guest, and he is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, Tim Dickinson, who, it turns out, lives right here in the California, San Francisco Bay Area. Tim, thank you for making time.
Glad to be with you.
Can I ask you, as someone who's been watching the campaign from the beginning, is this just never land or through the looking glass that, my gosh, Santorum has come out ahead in the polls again and again and is now considered by many to be a viable person to upset Mitt Romney?
No, I don't think anybody predicted this. I think anybody who tells you that is lying. There's always been a spot for the, not Romney candidate. Mitt Romney's been the anointed one, the inevitable one, the next guy in line, which is usually the guy who gets the GOP nomination. And so there have been, just an extensive slate of candidates vying to be the not Romney and sort of trying to be the last man standing. And Santorum's strategy, which you can't second guess it because it seems to have worked, was to sort of just stay in the field, stay positive, and keep on a social conservative message. And the issue terrain has shifted to him tremendously with this, questions of birth control and other social issues as the economy has started to improve and sort of eroded Mitt Romney's "Mr. Fix-It, I'm Mr. Economy, I'll get this economy back on track" message. And so, but that you would have had to have gone through, Herman Cain and brief flirtations with Donald Trump and, everybody else who's already, Newt Gingrich's resurrection and re-resurrection. Certainly this is an implausible state of affairs, but you understand how this works in just the essence of, Romney's not a tried and true social conservative, and Santorum, for having lost his last Senate race by 18 points, fits that cultural is just a much easier cultural fit with the Republican base than is a Mormon like Mitt Romney, Wall Street banker like Mitt Romney.
One of the odd things about Santorum, as I watch him become more publicly exposed, he doesn't seem, even this late in the game, he doesn't seem packaged. He doesn't seem as though he's the product of a passel of advisors. He looks like a guy who's going out there saying what he believes. He doesn't go home to people scolding him, saying, okay, don't say this tomorrow, do say this tomorrow. He just comes across as a guy who's a genuine self. Is that what you get from him?
The other day I called him Bizarro Bulworth. He's sort of, Bulworth was obviously the yes. famous movie where Warren Beatty goes off the rails and stops listening to what anybody else says and finds himself rising in the polls. And so this is, there's an element of authenticity to Rick Santorum that, love him or hate him, he wears himself on his vested shirt sleeves. He doesn't have a pollster. So I think you're right. He doesn't have a big campaign apparatus. He doesn't have a lot of money. He's being outspent by sort of wild multiples, orders of magnitude by the Romney campaign, despite his the fact that he has a very rich patron in Mr. Foster Friess. But you're absolutely right. He is a genuine article with a lot of faults, I would say, but somebody who appeals to social conservatives because he is one. There's no bending over backwards to try and accommodate the worldview of social conservatives. He is a tried and true member of that social conservative movement,
which makes him once again seem like more than just not Mitt Romney. And I know the Tea Partiers have first held up and then been disillusioned with one potential leader after another. Are they the ones? Are the Tea Partiers? Do they comprise a big group of Santorum's followers?
Well, I think they do. I don't think that the Tea Party really is the operative group here, though. I really do think it is Christian conservatives, many of whom are uneasy with Mitt Romney's religion, who are flocking to Rick Santorum, and so he sort of has the cultural aspects of the Tea Party down, but he's a big spending conservative. He was sort of part of the compassionate conservative set that got thrown out of office in 2006, and so that's his legacy as a legislator is not one that sort of goes very easily with the Tea Party mindset of no debt and small government. But certainly, I think the social conservative aspects of that kind of make up for that, and I think speak to the Tea Partiers more culturally than a Mitt Romney does.
I'm talking to contributing editor for Rolling Stone, Tim Dickinson. We're discussing the rise of Rick Santorum, and later on in this same show, we're going to be talking about the Republicans as a whole, as a party, and how this sort of rise of someone like Santorum could occur. I was looking at a number of your articles for Rolling Stone, Tim, and one thing I do enjoy is your wry sense of dealing with some of the surprises here. Mitt Romney getting rickrolled, which I thought was very clever. But I also wonder, one of the things I discovered as I was putting this hour together, no one seems to have done, since Matt Taibbi did it for Rolling Stone back in 2006, no one seems to have done the kind of soup to nuts, here's who this person is, here's what he believes, here's why, here's what his family thinks about him, here's what his former employees think about him. You see that with almost every serious campaign participant. For some reason, that doesn't exist around Rick Santorum. I couldn't find an exhaustive analysis, biographical analysis of who this man is. To a journalist such as yourself, is he a mystery man of sort? Is he what you see is what you get? He's not worth analyzing?
No, I think this is the guy who is sort of the bottom of the C-list, not Romney barrel. And I think people have, sort of got a little bit serious about him after he won or tied in Iowa. And then he didn't seem to have much momentum. And so there's sort of been no sustained looking at him under a microscope. Every other candidate has gotten, vetted to one degree or another, whether it's, dredging Newt Gingrich's, second ex-wife out of the closet, or exposing Herman Cain's affairs, or Ron Paul's newsletters. And so I think if Santorum's strength stays up in the poll numbers, you're going to see a much more serious vetting of him. But there's something sort of that's been kind of fairly implausible about his current status. And I think political journalists, having done all this work to vet, others are sort of waiting for what maybe the imminent collapse of his campaign. But I think you're starting to see dribs and drabs of this. There was a 2008 commencement address that he gave where he said that mainstream Protestantism was not true Christianity, and suggested it had been led astray by Satan. And this stuff is coming out, and of course his views on contraception. Excuse me, we have a fire engine going by here. But his views on contraception and enabling non-procreative sex. These are all suddenly coming to the fore, and I think certainly aren't going to hurt him with social conservatives who agree with him, but are not going to recommend him if indeed he makes it through to the general election. Boy,
does that ever reach back to what I had just asked you as to how many handlers he have and how preformed he is. I don't know how many political handlers would let him go out and demean any kind of sex but the procreative kind. I mean, that's pretty far afield for most Americans.
No, it is, and it's hard to know exactly what his game plan was in getting into this race. I mean, was he a Herman Cain who wanted to promote his books, or just sort of stay alive and become a Fox, a more highly compensated Fox News commentator, or was he serious about becoming president? I think this is sort of a strange redemption story for him. But certainly he has been outspoken on social conservative issues in a way that are wildly out of step with the mainstream. And I think, the Obama campaign has just got to be, high-fiving every day that Santorum is out there sort of making this race about social conservative issues, making making Romney, bend over backwards to try and out social conservative Rick Santorum. It's just, this development couldn't be working out any better for the luckiest man in the world, who is the President of the United States.
Well, some of the stuff that we hear from Rick Santorum's mouth is consistent with what we hear from other Republicans. And it's GottaLaff, our news commentator, who actually tipped us off to this video that was posted by CNN. And I found this interesting in how it reaches back to a very old sentiment that has been foisted by the Republicans on the left for some time. And it does seem to be working for Santorum. So let's give a listen to what he had to say.
Don't you see how they see you? how they look down their nose at the average Americans. These elite snobs.
These elite snobs, that's a recurrent theme from the Republican side. This is the first thing that I've heard from his mouth that seems more like he is mouthing the standard mantras. And you and I discussed a little bit earlier how sincere he is or is not. In this case, is this someone pulling out a sword from a bag of tricks and saying, okay, I'll apply this one now? Or do you think this man really looks at the left and says, oh, you bunch of effete snobs?
I think he probably believes it more than say a Mitt Romney who has a private beach in New Hampshire. You know what I mean? I think this is someone who's I think does have at least a way of communicating with working class voters who don't go to Democratic fundraisers. Do you know what I mean? This is a guy who is more conversant in lunch bucket politics, and I think that's more true to his history, despite the fact that he's now a millionaire who's doing his own taxes, which to me suggests a failure to delegate. And it's not exactly what you want in a chief executive, But this is base talk, and I think this is the kind of stuff that Santorum's quite good at. Is that evangelical Christians in this country feel like they are constantly the butt of cultural mockery, and so I think he speaks to that sense of woundedness that these folks feel, and that he's just sort of very conversant in that. So that's not surprising to me, and I don't think it's contrived on his part, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I see what you're saying with that. I saw in an interview with you and Keith Olbermann, and Olbermann made reference to you and he agreeing that Santorum is going to self-destruct at some point. There's a lot of fun jousting on the left about, how Newt Gingrich would melt down, because that's just fun to visualize. But I can't see a Santorum melting down. He seems to be on such an even keel all the time. I mean, what do you fathom a Santorum meltdown would look like?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be something that's going to be less necessarily destructive for the primary campaign. I think he will speak his mind in such a way that will be deeply offensive, primarily to the working women of this country. He's a misogynist who believes that women work only because of radical feminism destroying the fabric of America. So this is a guy who can't sort of keep his sort of paleo-conservative views in his pocket. Do you know what I mean? So yes. that is going to surface in an unguarded moment in a way that I think is going to be hard to recover from in any kind of national election, even if it doesn't necessarily hurt him among the GOP base. So I think it's not that his temperament is I think he's actually shown himself to be quite a controlled politician throughout this race, and sort of remarkably unspectacular but quite steady in the debates. But he's not, like you said, he's not packaged, and he is not guarded in the way that one needs to be, I think, as a presidential candidate, about views that are just deeply out of step with the American mainstream. Well,
I think you're really onto something there. I think that it will be, rather than a meltdown of epic proportions, it is going to be this accumulation of revelations of his own character. We saw a little bit of that this week when the question came up about radical feminists in his book, and he essentially said, "Oh, well, my wife wrote that part," and she didn't get credit for the book. So at the same time, he gave her credit and then promptly threw her under the bus. And I can't imagine that would play well even with his constituency.
Right. I mean, again, it speaks to, here I am degrading women. Oh, in fact, my wife is the one who degraded women. I don't know how that plays with women. I mean, I don't know. But again, I think this is. It's as though the Republicans have forgotten that America passed the 19th Amendment. Do you know what I mean? I mean, women are going to vote in this election, and you're seeing this tremendous shift among unmarried women right now who were sort of flirting with the Republicans. The polling had matchups with Romney, but there's been about a 17-point swing away from Romney and back towards President Obama. So this is the Santorum's rise and its extended GOP primary process is shifting a key voter bloc back into Obama's camp. One presumes fairly solidly if this contraception stuff keeps up.
When you look at this race, we talked a little bit earlier about how Santorum suddenly started accumulating poll results in his favor. He's got a much higher profile now than we expected him to have at this juncture. Do you see him going all the way to the party's convention at this point?
I mean, it's very difficult to see how he funds his campaign. It's difficult to see how Romney doesn't sort of just carpet bomb him with his own money if necessary. But there's, the reason that John McCain became the nominee 4 years ago was because Fred Thompson and Mike Huckabee and Mitt Romney and even Rudy Giuliani were sort of duking it out and splitting up the not McCain vote, and McCain was able to sort of shoot the narrows and emerge on top. And Romney has repeatedly failed to separate from the pack while the pack was still divided. And now it seems to be increasingly a two-man race between Romney and Santorum, and Romney's got a pretty solid ceiling, about 30% of the party, and for a large number of social conservatives, he's just unacceptable. And if that base of folks rallies around Santorum, it's also hard to see how Romney walks away with this thing. But he's much better funded. But it doesn't. Every state that Santorum walks into, he walks into a network. A very politically powerful network of social conservatives, churched people, who can sort of organize on his behalf, show up at caucuses without him investing a lot of time and organizational resources. Mm-hmm. That sort of Huckabee, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin social network is sort of there for him to plug into as the social conservative, not Romney candidate.
Tim Dickinson with Rolling Stone. We're going to spend a few more minutes with him, and we're going to stay with the topic of Rick Santorum, but we're going to turn it over to another side of it. We're going to talk about the Republican Party as a whole, what void he filled for them, and what else is coming up for the other candidates. It's all still to come here on Indeed. Welcome back to In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro. We spent this hour talking so far about Rick Santorum, and Rick Santorum does not exist in a void. He exists in a strange little world, but not a void. What's going on in the Republican Party that produced him, and what's happening to the other people who theoretically at least are still running for president? Tim Dickinson is spending this last segment with us. He is contributing editor Rolling Stone. You've seen his commentary elsewhere online and on TV. You've seen him with Keith Olbermann. And Tim, let's talk about the candidates that didn't show up. We kept hearing around the fringes that there were very quiet bits of the Republican Party who were saying someone may still show up. Jeb Bush may still throw his hat into the ring. XYZ may still show up and take this thing. It strikes me as so odd that a party with so much money, so much influence, so many PACs, and this was the cream of the crop they came up with, a cream of the crop that is so uncreamy that Rick Santorum can come up to the top of it. What does this tell us? What's going on there?
I can't believe you just used a sentence with cream and Santorum.
I was not going to go there.
I'm going to have a hard time recovering. I'm waving myself over here. Okay, so well, I'm sorry. What was the question?
I can't remember either.
Rise to the top. No, this has been a bizarre, truly hard to figure out moment in the Republican Party, and it's a difficult moment. One, because you understand why people wouldn't want to take on the Obama campaign. I mean, you have just a juggernaut with just incredible amounts of funding, an incredible organizational structure, a dynamic campaigner. I mean, it's hard to unseat an incumbent under the best of circumstances. But, Barack Obama is not Jimmy Carter. He's got, he's not been challenged within his own party, and he's got what could be sort of unlimited resources to wage a re-election battle. So I think that's Plus with somebody like Jeb Bush, you've got, just a hangover family name too soon factor, right? And so, and then some of the other folks, Haley Barbour, the governor of Mississippi, had some skeletons in his closet apparently that kept him from running. Mitch Daniel, they always, a lot of these folks blame their wives, but there's a hard. The GOP is a very fractured party at the moment too, because you are uniting, this Tea Party base, sort of a anti-Washington base, which is slightly different from the social conservative base, and then also the titans of high finance and business, and the sort of the Chamber of Commerce set, and so it's increasingly difficult to yoke both ends of that party together and get it all moving together in the same direction. And so it takes a sort of very special sort of personality to try and be everything that the Republican Party demands its frontrunner to be. And I mean, I think that's why you're seeing sort of this comic. Campaign.
A good word. Comic is a very good word.
This sort of comic campaign by, especially by Mitt Romney to be, all things to all conservatives, when his own record, sort of establishes him firmly as a sort of moderate Northeast Republican. And so you see all the trouble that Romney is having, tripping over himself to be something that he's not. And I think, Mitch Daniels would have had the same thing. Chris Christie in New Jersey would have, just not have been acceptable to, might have been a media darling on Fox News, but would not have been acceptable to certain segments of the GOP electorate. So I think the combination of the intimidation of facing the Obama machine, and also just an inability to see where the money comes from and how you unite all factions of the Republican Party. It's very tough nut to crack for a lot of people.
You put me in mind of something that Grover Norquist said at CPAC, and I just pulled it up. What the expectations would be for a Republican president, it's odd that this would be said so publicly. The spin that I saw on this from the Daily Beast was that this was over being reconciled to a Romney candidacy, but you could really apply this to just about anybody who's running as a Republican. And here's what he said. He said this publicly. I can't believe it. All we have to do is replace Obama. We are not auditioning for a fearless leader. We don't need a president to tell us in what direction to go. We know what direction to go. We want the Ryan budget. We just need a president to sign this stuff. We don't need somebody to think it up or design it. The leadership now for the modern conservative movement for the next 20 years will be coming out of the House and Senate. Pick a Republican with enough working digits to handle a pen to become president of the United States.
Well, that's a fairly self-serving comment on Norquist's part. Because
no, Grover Norquist self-serving?
Because that's his power base, right? He's he has rebranded the Republican Party around this low-tax, lard-the-rich platform. And so he has foot soldiers not only in Congress, but running down through the farm system in state legislators across the nation. And so certainly that's true for the next 20 years. He's got folks who will pass legislation that serves his interests, and he doesn't much, I think, care whether it's Romney or Santorum who's actually signing the documents. So I think that is a peculiar comment to Grover Norquist as much as it is a larger statement of the Republican Party, except to the point that even a guy like Rick Santorum, who's modeling himself as a Rust Belt lunch bucket conservative, has essentially the same economic agenda, the same anti-tax agenda that Mitt Romney does, and so there's some minor differences, but in terms of some tax credits for manufacturing, but essentially it's massive tax cuts for the wealthiest, and even tax increases for people at the bottom of the spectrum. So there's an economic agenda that unites. That will be served by whomever is in the White House on the Republican end, but so that I think that's sort of revealed by what Norquist is saying.
What about the tendency that of Santorum or anyone else, their potential for wandering away from a script? I mean, Norquist is a power broker. He speaks for power brokers to a certain extent. And I wonder how much obedience the power brokers in the Republican Party are looking for in a candidate. And of the four who are left standing, is Gingrich still standing technically? But of the ones who are left, which one is most likely to wander off script, to say to them, look, I was elected president, I'm going to do what I want, I don't care what the House and Senate vote for? Do any of them have that potential?
Well, I suppose if in the long shottiest of scenarios, if Ron Paul were elected, you wouldn't see him going along so nicely. And I like to think that Mitt Romney, I sleep better at night if I think that Mitt Romney is just a man who lies through his teeth and would actually govern more the way he governed in Massachusetts. Than everything that he's promised. He's sort of promised the sky to every possible Republican constituency, and you'd like to believe at some level that his actual record as a governor would as a president would more closely align with what he did as a governor. But that's sort of ultimately unknowable until you get to test it out.
That really is a best case scenario, though. I mean, God forbid we get a Mitt Romney. The best case scenario would be that he's just been lying the whole time on the campaign trail.
No, I think that's right, but I also think that that's been his game all along, was to sort of wink and nod at the general electorate, even as he's saying crazy things like, fetuses are people from the moment of conception, and zygotes are full constitutional citizens. So, it's sort of hard to believe that Mitt Romney actually believes that, but perhaps he has had a true conversion.
Well, let's talk about the suddenly absent Newt Gingrich. Is he still out there? What is he doing?
He's trying to build his war chest and sort of hang around at some level of relevance till I think this contest moves back to the South, because I think he's still the best thing going for a lot of conservatives south of the Mason-Dixon line. So, I think given everything we've seen in this contest, it doesn't behoove us to rule anybody out anymore, but it's hard to see how Gingrich gets revived for a third or a fourth time.
This is not a reflection on you personally, but I'm imagining that just about any journalist or commentator who prior to this election had been comfortable making predictions about Republicans is pretty much going to shy away from that nowadays.
This has been a humbling experience for those of us who, sort of like to prognosticate on the horse race. This has just been the strangest campaign that I can recall. I mean, you started off this election season with sort of the conventional wisdom, the debates don't really matter. Well, of course, they've mattered tremendously, and we've seen, I think, 10 individuals leading at various times in the Republican, in various polling of the Republican frontrunners. And so this has just been an incredibly volatile race, and I don't think anybody has a firm handle on how it all ends.
I don't know if it's coincidence, but I'm thinking about that very first debate when you had all of the Republican contenders posed just so at the edge of the stage with the lighting and the audience, and it looked for all the world like a reality show. And reality show-like, they've one by one fallen by the wayside as there have been all these, internecine wars and little dramas and revelation. I mean, this, honest to God, is political Survivor.
No, I think that's exactly right, and this, except for let's think about the traditional way that people talk about how you can win a campaign in American politics, and Santorum, for being as underfunded as he is sort of following that. Win Iowa, use that as a slingshot to catapult to a national stage, and I think it's sort of taken some odd twists and turns with Gingrich's rise and Romney winning Florida and Nevada, but I think we've actually seen some variant on sort of the more traditional get out there, do shoe leather, door knocking, handshaking, press the flesh in some of these small states and raise your national profile that way. So even in as much as we've seen a totally new narrative of this American Idol like audition, there actually have been some more familiar molds at play here.
Tim Dickinson, this has been a real pleasure, and I hope we can have you back.
Hey, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Tim Dickinson is contributing editor for Rolling Stone. We'll put some of the links up to his work online at indeep.org. So, how do you feel about this hour? Has it given you a grasp of who Rick Santorum is, what he's about? Yeah, I figured that no such hour would be complete without letting him speak for himself. So I started to look up quotes that tell you what Rick Santorum would be about if he got into the presidential chair, looking at his actual campaign statements. And it turns out I didn't need to do that because the fine folks at Think Progress beat me to it. They've got a great website. I urge you to check it out. It's called SantorumExposed.com, which I cannot believe was already taken by a porn site, but apparently it was available. SantorumExposed.com has Santorum's most outrageous campaign statements, starting with he would annul all same-sex marriages. Kind of a given. We knew he would do that. But he did that because he said gay relationships destabilize society. No legal protections to gay relationships. He has pledged to annul all same-sex marriages if elected president. Implied in that, this is me talking, not Think Progress, that he would sort of overstep the bounds of the presidential job description. But that's for a discussion for a different day. Now, when he was on his tour of Iowa, Santorum frequently compared same-sex relationships to inanimate objects like trees, basketballs, beer, and paper towels, even tried to blame the economic crisis on gay people. All right, so that's the first thing we know he'd do. Secondly, he says he's all for income inequality. They talk about income inequality. He says, I'm for income inequality. This is when he was talking to folks in Iowa. I think some people should make more than other people because some people work harder and have better ideas and take more risk, and they should be rewarded for it. And they're white and they grew up privileged. Oh, that's me editorializing again. No, in Santorum world, all people are absolutely created equal. And if you have opportunity and you work hard enough, you will be rewarded. That may have been true in America at some point. Tain't no more. Another claim on his part, contraception is a license to do things. What things? Santorum has pledged to repeal all federal funding for contraception and allow the states to outlaw birth control. Now, mind you, this list was written in January. And he has underlined again and again, he's perfectly willing to do exactly the same things. Because he insists that birth control is, quote, a license to do things in a sexual realm that is counter to how things are supposed to be. Rick Santorum cares about what position you're using. Rick Santorum is worried you might be wasting orgasms without creating zygotes. Rick Santorum does not believe in government interference unless it's between your legs. He also believes, by the way, on another point, that gay soldiers cause problems for people living in close quarters. So stand by for him to bring Don't Ask, Don't Tell or something even more draconian back. And finally, I got to thank Think Progress for this one. I had no idea this was here. Obama should oppose abortion because he is black. He was on Christian television in January. He said he was surprised President Obama didn't know when life began, given his skin color. Santorum said, I find it almost remarkable for a black man to say, now we're going to decide who are people and who are not people, he said. So now you feel perhaps you know Rick Santorum a little better? If you think he's insane, you have a little more of a grasp of it. Thanks for tuning into In Deep. It is a production of Live from the Left Coast. Our executive producer is Gordon Whiting. Matt Fiddler is our engineer. Our theme is by Big Troubles. David Gans produces our closing music. Thanks to Peter James Callahan at We Act Radio in Washington and to Hal Ginsberg at KRXA in Monterey. We're coming back next week to once again go in deep. Join us then. I'm Angie Coiro.
Oh, well, the man who stole the future has an oil drum for a heart and a strange preoccupation with other people's private parts. They want us to do what they say, but I'd rather live my own damn way. We'll take our culture back someday, but it's gonna get worse before it gets better. It's gonna get worse before it gets better. It's gonna get worse before it gets better, but I know it's gonna get better. Yes, I know it's gonna get better, 'cause it almost always does. I can't say much about the who and how, but I believe it just because. The day by day our bonds unweave, mammon gloats.
Thanks for tuning in this week to In Deep, which is a production of Live from the Left Coast. You can get more information on the show and our company at lftlc.com. Live from the Left Coast. While you're there, you can become a member and support our work. We have a separate website for the show that is indeep.org. If you have any questions or feedback, there's a contact button right there, indeep.org. We are developing a recurring series on mental health issues in our country, especially in this economy, and you're a big part of that. We'd like your topic suggestions, your stories, and your questions. Send them in via our website, the contact button at indeep.org. Join us again this time next week for 2 more hours of in-depth conversation. I'm Angie Coiro. Thanks, and we will see you then. You're listening to WPWC 1480 AM, Dumfries, Virginia. We Act Radio, home of Washington's progressive working community.